Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Living on the Verge. I'm Virginia, and this is the podcast where we pay attention to real life, the fun parts, the messy parts, and what they're trying to teach us. How's everybody doing? Can you believe it's halfway through the year? In fact, 2 years ago on this day, we were getting ready for my son's wedding. And so tomorrow will be the 2-year anniversary. Happy anniversary, Chance and Ciara. We love you. And you know what else? This weekend is 4th of July. Can you believe it? I'm mind blown. We just seem to be sailing through the year at lightning speed. And it kind of got me to thinking about the first half of the year. And I did something that was kind of wild. I decided to go back and look through every podcast transcript from January to the most recent. And I did it not because I wanted to relive every episode, and certainly not because I wanted to read all the transcripts. But I did it. Every Tuesday episode, every Friday episode, every interview, every solo conversation, every Virginia rabbit trail I decided to go down. And I expected that I would find 44 different episodes. But I didn't. I found one story. And it was all because I wanted to answer one question. Who have I become over the last 6 months? Has anything changed? And you guys, it wasn't the outcome I anticipated. I was expecting a list of accomplishments, not of everything I did, but I was looking to see in which ways I had changed. And that's what I want to talk with you about today. So, when you have a podcast, one thing for sure is you have documented proof, and it can be very revealing. And though I don't live my life looking backwards, I thought for this exercise, it might actually show me a few things. And oh boy. So let's get into it. Let's talk a little bit about January, Virginia. Back in January, you may recall I chose my word for the year. I'm not a resolution gal, but I felt like if I chose a word for the year, it would instead act like kind of a flashlight, right? Illuminating the way for 2026 decisions. And the word I chose is alignment. And it's a great word. I chose it because at the time I thought alignment meant getting everything in order, and I wanted to improve my health. I wanted to look better and feel my best, and that meant I should lose a few pounds, not a ton, but those last few pounds that make you feel slower and sluggish. I wanted better systems in my life. I remember making a chart of sorts of how many times I wanted to hang out with friends, how many times I wanted to have the kids over, how many times I wanted to go on a date night with my hubby. I wanted to get caught up on finances. The finances themselves were fine, but I had lost grasp on what was coming in and what was going out. And though I had always been one to work from a budget, years had passed since I had had one. I wanted to grow and monetize this podcast. I knew February was the 1-year anniversary of the podcast, and I had big plans. I wanted to simplify my home. Heck, January, Virginia didn't even know where she wanted to live, but she knew she craved simplicity. I wanted to feel like I had my act together. And looking back, I realized there was a quiet urgency underneath almost everything. You could almost hear it in the transcript. It was wild. It wasn't a panic, And it wasn't anxiety exactly, though some days, some episodes did have an undercurrent of, damn, this girl's worked up today. But it was just this feeling that if I could get enough things organized, my closet, my bills, my office, my pantry, you were there for the ride, then life would finally settle down. And I realized I may be painting a picture of my life as if it's in complete chaos. And it certainly was not and is not. In fact, if you've ever been over to my home, then you know I'm kind of crazy about things like that. But what I didn't realize then was that alignment wasn't really the destination. It was simply the invitation. The invitation to accept something new and different. And little did I know that one decision would land me where I sit today, in a whole different space. Okay. So, what changed? Here's what's funny. Really not a lot. There wasn't one huge breakthrough, no lightning bolt or aha moment, no dramatic turning point or sudden solution that just moved the needle. I wish I could say that it was easy. I wish I could tell you there was this magic formula where you just mix this with that and suddenly all of your problems become really easy to solve. But you guys, it was just dozens of ordinary moments. Maybe a journal entry one morning that made me pause and reflect, or that made me smile and laugh at myself. Or a walk that I was walking where I realized this isn't just exercise. I'm noticing the trees, the squirrels, the kids playing, all the things that I would miss if I hadn't walked at all, right? Not to mention the vitamin D I was getting, so win-win. Or maybe a conversation with a friend that resulted in a huge realization. And I can say in no uncertain terms that happened several times throughout the course of the first part of the year. Or cooking dinner. Listen, the Women in Business series was a year-old idea that finally got brought to life. And then there was Camp Nana, which was simply my attempt to connect with my grandsons. Sometimes it was a random Tuesday morning with a cup of coffee where my Bible verse just really hit home. However, at the time, none of these things felt life-changing. But as a body of work, when you put it all together, as it turns out, I do believe they changed me. So, what happened? Well, somewhere along the way, I started reading my Bible almost every morning. Not because I felt guilty if I didn't, or because I wanted to be holy, or because I wanted to be this, that, or the next. No. Because I actually wanted to read. I bought this great study Bible, and I just found it helped me ground my mornings. And then I started journaling differently. I've always journaled, but have you ever noticed we tend to journal more when we are down, or when we're in crisis, or when we're struggling with something? The same thing could be said about prayer. But I started being consistent with it, and I noticed something fascinating. I was documenting positive milestones, big wins, moments of joy that I may have otherwise just glossed right over. Because, like I just said, we tend to focus much less on the positive moments in life. But it became less for me about documenting my day and more about asking myself better questions, and then using the data that came from those answers to process how I wanted to move forward in life. And so little by little, I started building systems instead of relying on motivation, which took me a while to discover, Remember, I recently said, like, I'm never going to just wake up one day and want to do squats. Yeah, but it was little things like meal planning, which I'd done for years, but not quite the same way as I do it now. Or my financial routines. Whittling down time spent in the office for me was a big one. And I thought about this for a while. And I guess after all these years of having my own business, I was just sort of used to being in the office all day. And it took me a while to realize I don't have to do that anymore. And then little nominal things like laundry or office days, those were the things that quietly just made my life easier. But something funny happened last summer on the trip to Europe. And when I talk to other people who went on this same trip, I hear the same thing. But I came back home and discovered I really like to play with my friends. I just want to go outside and play. And I went on a months long let's have fun-a-thon. So, whereas we had been eating out a lot, I made a small change and now we cook at home again, almost exclusively. Not because I had to, but because I realized I actually enjoy it. I love creating in the kitchen, and it brings me joy to bring others joy through my food. And oddly enough, shopping out of my freezer became kind of a game. Remember I told you I'd always meal planned? Yeah, I would sit down with a blank piece of paper and I would think, what am I going to feel like eating next Thursday? And then I would pick something out of the sky. I'd go buy all of the ingredients for it, and hence I would have my menu. But now I shop in my freezer and my pantry first, and it's been months since I have had to buy a full week's worth of groceries. In fact, I was just looking at my grocery my grocery budget. And do you know that over the last 60 days, we have decreased our grocery budget almost 40%? You guys, that's nearly in half. And oh, by the way, I'm cooking at home almost exclusively, and yet I'm still spending almost half of what I was spending before. So that just tells me a lot of food was getting wasted. I was going to the store to buy groceries, and then we were going out and having dinner anyway. Not very efficient, right? But shopping from my freezer and my pantry was a small change that made a big impact. And you know what else I noticed listening to the transcripts is that at some point I just started showing up to the gym, to friendships, to this podcast. Even on days when I didn't particularly feel motivated to do so. And maybe most importantly, I really started paying attention. I mean, really paying attention to my reactions, to my relationships, to what gave me peace, and to what quietly stole my peace. I became hyper aware of how I was expending my energy and of how important that energy had become to me to preserve and use wisely for things that served me. This part surprised me because I don't think I intentionally decided, hey, let me come up with the list of things I want to stop doing. No, I just did. I just stopped. And stopping certain belief systems that no longer served me made a big difference. For example, I stopped believing that every single day had to earn its value. I stopped trying to fill every open space on my calendar. I guess I just thought this is what retired people are supposed to do. I stopped reacting immediately to every single emotion. And I'm getting better at letting things breathe before deciding what they mean. Processing has become a big part of my vernacular. And it's not uncommon to hear me say something like, I'm still processing this, or I'm going to sleep on it and I'll get back to you. And another big one is I just kind of stopped assuming I knew what other people were thinking. I don't think I'm the only one who does this, but we have a tendency to get inside of other people's heads and assume what they're thinking and that we know what they are thinking. I just started asking instead of assuming, whether it was in friendships or family or just life in general. And you know what else? I just got much more comfortable simply watching, listening, observing, and letting people show me who they are. And I stopped believing that productivity was the same thing as self-worth. That one, okay, that one may still be a work in progress, but I've definitely made progress. Now, here's some of the biggest surprises. If you'd asked January Virginia what was going to change her this year, I never would have guessed interviewing 7 women that I already knew would be one of the things that would cause so much change in me. But it was. And the Women in Business series ended up teaching me just as much as it taught my listeners. It reminded me there isn't just one path. There isn't a right way and a wrong way. Nobody has it all figured out. And you know what else? Every single person is building a life one decision at a time. And then there was Camp Nana. I thought I was creating memories for Ethan and Zeke, but instead, they reminded me of what actually matters. Not elaborate plans, not perfect schedules, simply connection, kindness, presence. Who knew a 2-day summer camp at Nana's would end up teaching Nana the biggest lesson? And here's the biggest shift. When I look back over 6 months, I don't actually think the biggest change was my health or my podcast or even my routines. And for the record, my daily life is quite different than it was in January. But I think it was this. I became less reactive and more thoughtful, more patient, and more willing to let life unfold before I immediately rush to decide what it must all mean. And that's a version of myself that I really like. In fact, I'll share a little secret. A few days ago while I was journaling, I wrote something that surprised me. I wrote, "I like June, Virginia." And that made me smile because I'm not sure January Virginia would have believed I'd even say that. You know, after I finished reading all those transcripts, I realized something. I had spent all this time looking at how I had changed, but I still hadn't answered what surprised me the most. And all of that self-discovery was great and all, but one of the biggest discoveries wasn't actually about me. I kind of accidentally tripped upon a realization about this podcast. Bear with me for a second. If you've been listening for a while, you probably remember me wondering out loud on more than one occasion, what exactly is Living on the Verge becoming? What is this podcast? Was it interviews? Was it sharing my journals? Was it travel, food reviews, health, talking about my family? Was it highlighting businesses, talking about life lately? Honestly, some weeks I would worry that it was just a little too much of everything, kind of like if you stand for everything, then you fall for nothing, or if you fall for everything, you stand for nothing. That's it. If you fall, yep, that's the one. Anyway, some weeks I thought it was that. But then I stepped back and I looked at all 44 episodes together and I laughed. Of course, it is all over the place. But then again, so is my life. One week, I'm talking about osteoporosis. The next, I'm interviewing incredible women who built businesses completely differently than I ever would have. And then, in the next moment, I'm telling you I accidentally bought lettuce again. Or that cauliflower rice has apparently become its own supporting cast member on this podcast because it's mentioned over and over again throughout those transcripts. And then we're talking about being the oldest child, or the Camp Nana antics, or my faith. And then I'm telling you about a cruise. And then a random Tuesday where I realize the day didn't actually need to earn anything. It was all over the place. But you know what? Those aren't random topics. That's my life, you guys. And somewhere along the way, I stopped trying to make this podcast fit into someone else's definition of what a podcast should be. You know why? It's because I finally realized something. The podcast didn't need a niche. It just needed honesty. And the common thread was really never the topic. The common thread was paying attention. It was really there all along, and it was so simple. That's what living on the Virg has been from the very beginning. And the funny thing is that I don't think I recognized it until I stepped back and looked at the whole picture. The transcripts also help me to understand something else. All year long, I've been talking about systems. Boy, have I been talking about systems. Meal planning, receipts, office day, closet reorganizations, shopping in my freezer. My notes app, which, by the way, looked like a digital junk drawer before I finally got my act together just last week. And now I can find anything at a moment's notice. DM me if you want the formula. It literally took me an hour and it's fantastic. I just love it. And for in fact, before I go on, now that I think about it, organizing the notes app may have been what gave me the idea to go back and review the transcripts because I could see them all in one place. Isn't that wild how one thing could lead to another and could lead you down a whole new road that you wouldn't have otherwise anticipated? And for the longest time, I thought all of those systems that I had existed to make me more productive, to make me feel like I was living. I was moving through life. But you guys, they don't. You know what they do? The systems created peace for me. And that's a very different motivation. And that was kind of one of those moments where I was like, that is where you need to lean in, right? When dinner is already planned, you're not taking energy out of your day trying to figure out what you're going to eat for dinner. When the receipts are finished, I'm not thinking about the receipts anymore. When I know what's in my freezer, I'm wasting less food, spending less money, and somehow creating better meals than when I just shopped. Who knew? It turns out I wasn't trying to become more productive. Heck, I'm tired. I've been productive for a lot of years. Got that big milestone birthday coming up, remember? No. I'm trying to become more present. That's what I found. Because every unfinished task steals a little bit of attention, a little bit of energy. every decision you keep putting off, like the HOA, keeps taking up space in your brain. So, as it turns out, the systems weren't the goal. The freedom the systems created was the goal. Isn't that funny? How you could set out to do one thing and end up maybe not necessarily accomplishing that one thing, but the takeaway could be so much greater and richer than you could have ever imagined. And you guys, this whole thing may actually be one of the biggest themes for this entire year. Simply protecting the calm. I don't think January Virginia even knew that that's something that she wanted. Oh no, January Virginia, she wanted excitement, momentum, book clubs, wine clubs, sip and paints, ceramic classes, all the things running around in my head, progress, accomplishment. But somewhere over these last 6 months, all of that changed. And just in the course of living life, I started protecting my peace instead. Peace in my calendar. I remember looking at my calendar at one point, sometime I think in March, and it was just jam-packed. And I had set up all of these outings and things that I wanted to do, but I wasn't looking forward to any of them because I felt so overwhelmed by how packed my calendar was. But now there was peace around my calendar. Now there are weeks where there's absolutely nothing on there. And I welcome that. Just in the same way I welcome peace in my home. I love days where I get up and just decide it's going to be an electronics-free day. And I read and I walk, and technically I do listen to music, so I guess that's electronics, but please, who could live a life without music? Don't even take me down that dark, dark road. Anyway, I love those days of peace in my home. Peace in my relationships. Peace in my own mind. And that doesn't mean life got easier. Believe me, it didn't. There were doctor's appointments, things that didn't go according to plan, friendships that changed and evolved, marriage conversations. And some of those could be tougher than others, right? And then there were health challenges that we've just had to get through. Then there's this podcast, which I produce twice every week. And my big moment in the sun, I'm turning 60. You know what I realized, you guys? Real life never stops happening. I just stopped believing every single thing required an immediate reaction. The way I like to look at it now is I'm learning to let life breathe. You know, sometimes the answer doesn't come today. Sometimes people are just busy. Sometimes a bad day is simply that, a bad day. And sometimes, and this one's not easy for me, I don't need to solve the problem. I just need to sleep on it. That has been one of the healthiest changes I've made all year. I think I started picking it up long before I started noticing it, but I've really tried to hone in on the skill of being more pensive and processing more, and I think it's served me well. And then there were all of the people who unknowingly became my teachers, like the Women in Business series, right? It was supposed to highlight all these incredible women. I have all this beautiful, rich group of friends from different places in life. And it did all of that. Certainly it did. But every conversation taught me something too. Not because everyone agreed, actually, because nobody did. Everybody built success a little differently. Everyone measured life differently. But you know what else? I noticed we are more alike than we are different at the end of the day. But all of that together gave me permission to stop looking for one right way to live. Right? There probably isn't one. But at the end of the day, there is only your way. And that was pretty freeing. And Camp Nana taught me something too. It was a biggie. Not because it was perfect. Goodness knows it wasn't. I overplanned. I overpacked. I probably overthought half of it. And yet, the boys remembered exactly none of the things I had stressed about. They remembered laughing, being together, feeling love, connection. We all did. That right there, that was a big lesson that stayed with me. And I promise you, that lesson impacted me in such a way that it's going to help me change the way I approach things in the future, which, if I'm being frank, actually takes a huge weight off of my shoulders because I have a tendency to be really hard on myself. And now I know that I don't have to. And you know what? I think adults do the same thing. We think people are going to remember our perfectly executed plans. Most of the time, they remember how we made them feel. So, what is the state of the Virg? Honestly, better than I realized. Not because I've arrived, but because I trust myself more. And you know, I still have my perpetual list. Wink, wink, funny side note. I've just learned I don't need 13 organizers and 22 planners. My life works best when I have a steno pad and I get up in the morning and I write down what I need to do that day. And then maybe I pull from a list of things that are sitting around needing to be done. But life should not require a 2-hour planning session in order to know that you need to brush your teeth. And for a while, that was the state of the Virg. But now, I'm still learning. I'm still growing. I kind of love that I could say that. I'm still growing. But you know what has shifted? I trust myself more. I don't rush to conclusions as quickly, not about myself and not about others. And I don't feel the need to control every single outcome anymore. I don't believe that every day has to prove its worth. I think some days can just exist for purposes of helping you recover from the last, or maybe to prepare you for the next. And I think I've become more comfortable simply just living my life instead of constantly evaluating it and trying to change it and amend it and tweak it. And so, friends, as I head into the second half of 2026, I don't really have another list of resolutions. I don't really make resolutions in January either. And I don't have a dramatic reinvention planned. I have a few simple intentions. I want to keep protecting the calm I've worked so hard to build. I want to keep paying attention. I want to keep choosing connection over perfection. And I want to keep showing up, both for people I love and for this little podcast that has somehow become one of my favorite places to think out loud. You know, yesterday morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table. I had my cup of coffee, my Bible was open, and I was getting ready to do some journaling. The dogs had already been fed, and the house was in one of those completely quiet moments. Nothing extraordinary was happening. And it hit me. This. It's this. This is the life I kept trying to build. Not a bigger life, not a busier life, not a more impressive life. Just one I was actually present for. Back in January, I thought alignment meant getting everything lined up. My health, my finances, my house, my routines, my podcasts. And maybe that's not what I started off thinking, but that's what it quickly became. I thought if I could just get everything organized, life would finally settle down. Today, today I think alignment is something you notice. You notice it when your life starts looking more like your values than like your calendar. You notice when peace quietly becomes more important than proving something. You notice when an ordinary Tuesday becomes worth talking about. A few days ago, while I was journaling, I wrote something that surprised even me. I wrote, I like June, Virginia. When I first wrote these words, I thought they were about confidence. Now that I'm really looking back and thinking about it, I think they were really about contentment. You guys, it's not because everything is perfect, and certainly not because every goal has been accomplished, but because somewhere along the way, I stopped trying so hard to be someone else, and I started appreciating the woman I was becoming. Maybe that's the state of the Virg. And honestly, I kind of like it here. Listen, I love you guys all. Thank you so much for spending part of your week with me. Thank you for thinking out loud with me. And thank you for reminding me week after week that ordinary lives really are worth paying attention to. I'm Virginia. I'll be back on Friday. And until then, I'll be right here, living on the Virg. Have a wonderful week.